Wyoming Territory, 1885. Summer heat rippled across the rolling plains where the Sweetwater Valley opened like a promise beneath the vast blue sky. The land here marked men with its challenges, branded them with calluses and scars, hardened their eyes against the unforgiving sun, and taught them that surviving the frontier meant depending on no one but yourself. This was the truth that Sam Hawkins had learned through 26 years of frontier life, and it had served him well. Sam adjusted his worn leather gloves as he rode across the southeastern edge of his modest cattle operation. His roan gelding moved steadily beneath him, familiar with the terrain that stretched out toward the horizon. With his tan Stetson pulled low against the afternoon glare, Sam's blue eyes scanned the grassland for any signs of his wandering cattle. He was short-handed this season, and every stray represented money he couldn't afford to lose. The ranch had been his father's dream, not his. Just 50 acres and a small herd that barely kept him fed some years. His pa had died believing that hard work alone would tame the wild and turn it profitable. Now 3 years in the ground, the old man had left Sam with little more than calloused hands and the bone-deep certainty that the frontier was a place where dreams went to die slow, painful deaths. "A man's only as good as his self-reliance out here," Sam muttered, repeating his father's most treasured wisdom as he urged his horse up a gentle rise. From the ridge, he could see the gray thunderheads gathering on the western horizon. The coming storm looked mean, the kind that could flood the low country and scatter a herd for miles. He'd need to round up the cattle in the south pasture and get them to higher ground before nightfall. Sam had learned young that attachments were liabilities in this unforgiving country. His mother had died of fever when he was 12. His father had succumbed to pneumonia after a winter rescue attempt for a neighbor's lost child. The neighbor had moved away the following spring. Folks came and went on the frontier, only the land remained constant in its harsh indifference. As he rode along the ridge, Sam noticed something unusual in the distance, a flash of color against the monotonous prairie grass. He pulled his field glasses from his saddlebag and focused on the anomaly. A covered wagon sat at an odd angle near the creek bed, one wheel clearly broken. A figure in a blue dress moved around it with apparent agitation. Sam's first instinct was to turn his horse around. Trouble wasn't his business, and stopping to help strangers only invited more of it. The storm was coming, and he had his own problems to manage. But something, perhaps his father's ghost whispering in his ear about Christian charity, made him hesitate. "Damn it all," he muttered, tucking away the glasses and turning his horse toward the stranded wagon. He'd offer minimal assistance and be on his way, nothing more. As he approached, the figure came into clearer view. She was a young woman, perhaps 22 or 23, with honey-blonde hair escaping from what had once been an elegant updo. Her blue traveling dress, though dusty from the trail, was of a quality Sam rarely saw in these parts. She was tugging ineffectually at the broken wagon wheel, her face flushed with effort and frustration. She straightened when she heard his approach, one hand shielding her eyes from the sun, the other reaching somewhat uncertainly toward the wagon bed, likely for a weapon. Sam couldn't blame her. A lone woman had every right to be cautious. "Afternoon, ma'am," Sam called, stopping his horse at a respectful distance. "Looks like you've had some trouble." The woman regarded him warily. Up close, Sam was struck by her striking gray eyes, the color of storm clouds, and the determined set of her chin. "The wheel broke about an hour ago," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious predicament. "My driver went to find help at the nearest ranch or town." Sam glanced at the sky. "He left you alone with a storm coming." "I insisted," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. "The horses needed watering and someone had to stay with the wagon." Something about her composure impressed Sam. Most travelers new to the territory panicked at the first sign of trouble. "You're a fair piece from anywhere," he observed. "Your driver won't be back before that storm hits." He nodded toward the horizon. "I'm Samuel Hawkins. I run cattle on the north side of the valley." "Tessa Whitney," she replied after a brief hesitation. "I was headed to Sweetwater." Sam dismounted, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "That wheel won't be fixed quickly, Miss Whitney, and that storm's going to be here in less than an hour." He gestured toward the darkening sky. "My place isn't far. You're welcome to shelter there until your driver returns or the wheel can be repaired." Tessa Whitney looked at him appraisingly, clearly weighing her limited options. I don't make a habit of riding off with strangers, Mr. Hawkins. The corner of Sam's mouth twitched. And I don't make a habit of inviting strangers to my home, Miss Whitney. But I also don't leave people to face Wyoming storms in broken wagons. They tend not to survive the experience. A flash of lightning in the distance punctuated his point. The woman glanced at the gathering clouds, then back at Sam. "Very well," she said after a moment. "I appreciate your assistance." As she gathered a few belongings from the wagon, Sam secured what he could of her supplies, covering them with the wagon's canvas to protect them from the coming rain. The wind was picking up now, carrying the scent of rain. "Do you need help mounting?" he asked as she approached with a small valise. "I can manage," she replied, handling the awkward climb onto his horse with surprising grace. Sam swung up behind her, keeping a respectful distance while maintaining enough contact to ensure she wouldn't fall. "Hold on," he instructed as they set off toward his ranch, the wind now gusting around them and the first fat raindrops beginning to fall. By the time they reached Sam's modest cabin, the storm had unleashed its full fury. They were both soaked through despite their hurried pace. Sam helped Tessa down from the horse and quickly led the animal into the small barn before joining her on the porch. "It's not much," he said as he pushed open the door to his cabin, suddenly aware of how sparse and utilitarian his home must seem to someone accustomed to finer things. The cabin consisted of one main room with a stone fireplace, a small table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, and a few shelves of supplies. A door at the back led to a lean-to kitchen. "I'll get a fire started," Sam said, moving to the fireplace while trying not to notice how Tessa's wet dress clung to her figure. "There's a blanket on the bed if you want to wrap up while your things dry." As he busied himself with the fire, Tessa took in her surroundings. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Just me and occasional ranch hands during busy seasons," Sam replied, striking a match to the kindling. "Most folks find more companionship in town." "And you prefer solitude?" There was something in her tone, not judgment, but genuine curiosity. The kindling caught, and Sam added larger pieces of wood before answering. "Solitude's more dependable than people, in my experience." Tessa had wrapped the woolen blanket around her shoulders, her wet hair now falling in loose waves. "That sounds rather lonely, Mr. Hawkins." Sam stood, brushing his hands on his pants. "Lonely is just a word people use when they can't stand their own company." The words came out harsher than he'd intended. "Sorry." "That was rude. Let me see if I can find you something dry to wear while your dress dries." He rummaged through an old trunk and produced a clean flannel shirt and a pair of trousers that had shrunk in washing. "These might do for now. I'll step outside while you change." When he returned a few minutes later, Tessa was standing by the fire in his clothes, which were comically oversized on her slender frame. She'd rolled up the sleeves and pant legs and secured the waist with what looked like one of her own belts. Despite the circumstances, she maintained a dignity that Sam found strangely compelling. "I was about to make coffee," he said, heading toward the kitchen, "unless you prefer tea." "Coffee is fine, thank you," she replied, following him. "May I help?" Sam glanced at her in surprise. Ladies of her apparent station rarely offered to help with such tasks. "You know how to make cowboy coffee." A smile curved her lips. "I've been known to boil water before, Mr. Hawkins." Something about her smile caught Sam off guard, a warmth that reached her eyes and formed small dimples at the corners of her mouth. He turned quickly to the stove, uncomfortable with the flutter it caused in his chest. As they worked side by side in the small kitchen, Sam found himself breaking his own rule about keeping conversations with strangers to a minimum. "What brings you to Sweetwater, if you don't mind my asking?" "Not many travel this way without good reason." Tessa measured coffee grounds into the pot. "Family business. My father passed away 3 months ago, and I've come to see to his property." "I'm sorry for your loss," Sam said, meaning it. "Was he a local man?" "In a manner of speaking. He owned land here but lived primarily in Denver." She paused, stirring the boiling coffee. "I haven't been to Wyoming since I was a child." Sam leaned against the counter, studying her. "The territory's changed a lot in recent years. Some would say not for the better." "And what would you say, Mr. Hawkins?" Those gray eyes fixed on him with unsettling directness. Sam considered his answer carefully. "I'd say Wyoming doesn't suffer fools or dreamers for long." It takes what it wants and gives back only what you fight for. You don't seem to hold much affection for your home. It's not about affection, it's about respect. Sam took 2 tin cups from a shelf. The land doesn't care if you love it or hate it. It only respects strength and persistence. Thunder crashed outside, making the windows rattle. Tessa jumped slightly, then composed herself with a small, self-deprecating smile. I think your Wyoming is trying to make your point for you. Despite himself, Sam chuckled. She does have a flair for the dramatic. They carried their coffee back to the main room and sat at the small table. The storm raged outside, but the cabin was snug, the fire casting a warm glow over the simple space. How long have you had your ranch? Tessa asked, warming her hands around the cup. It was my father's. I've been running it alone for 3 years since he passed. Sam took a sip of the strong coffee. It's small compared to some spreads, but it's paid for at least. That's no small accomplishment in these times, Tessa observed. Many ranchers are struggling with the recent winters and beef prices. Sam raised an eyebrow. You seem well informed about ranching matters for someone from Denver. A shadow passed over Tessa's face. My father made sure I understood business, regardless of whether society thought it proper for a woman. Sounds like a forward-thinking man. He was, her voice softened, though not everyone appreciated his methods or his vision. Something in her tone suggested deeper waters, but Sam knew better than to pry. Everyone on the frontier carried secrets and sorrows. It wasn't his place to unearth hers. They passed the afternoon in surprising comfort as the storm battered the cabin. Sam found Tessa to be thoughtful and well-spoken, but with a practical mind that belied her refined appearance. She asked intelligent questions about his cattle operation and seemed genuinely interested in his answers. As dusk approached, the storm showed no signs of abating. Sam lit oil lamps and began preparations for a simple supper. I expect your driver will have found shelter in town, he said as he sliced potatoes. No one would be traveling in this weather. I hope he's safe, Tessa replied, expertly dicing an onion Sam had given her. Though I suspect this means I'm imposing on your hospitality until morning. It's no imposition, Sam said, surprising himself with the sincerity of his words. It's nice to have company for a change. Tessa smiled at him, that same warm smile that seemed to reach beyond his carefully constructed walls, even for a man who prefers solitude. Sam felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the cook stove. Perhaps I should amend that to say I prefer select company. They shared a simple meal of fried potatoes, salt pork, and biscuits. Sam apologized for the plainness of the fare, but Tessa ate with genuine appreciation. This reminds me of camping trips with my father when I was young, she said, breaking open a steaming biscuit. He believed a person should know how to survive with minimal comforts. Wise man, Sam commented. Too many come west expecting the comforts of the east. And find themselves woefully unprepared, Tessa finished. Yes, I've seen it happen. Pride and ignorance are a dangerous combination on the frontier. As they washed dishes together afterward, Sam found himself watching Tessa's hands, smooth but capable, moving with purpose and efficiency. Not the hands of someone who had never worked, despite her obvious breeding. You can take the bed, Sam said as they returned to the main room. I'll sleep by the fire. I couldn't possibly displace you. I insist, he interrupted gently. My father would haunt me if I let a lady sleep on the floor while I took the bed. Tessa looked as though she might argue further, but instead nodded. Thank you. You've been more than kind, Mr. Hawkins. Sam, he said suddenly, if we're sharing quarters, even temporarily, you might as well use my given name. Then you must call me Tessa, she replied with a small smile. Miss Whitney makes me feel like a schoolteacher. The storm continued through the night, its fury gradually diminishing to a steady rain by dawn. Sam woke before sunrise, as was his habit, and quietly stoked the fire before putting coffee on to boil. He glanced at Tessa, still asleep in his narrow bed, her blonde hair spread across his pillow, her face softened in slumber. Something twisted in his chest, a longing he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. The quiet companionship of the previous evening had awakened an awareness of his solitude that he usually managed to ignore. Sam turned away, silently chastising himself. She was a stranded traveler, nothing more. Soon her driver would return, her wagon would be repaired, and she would continue to Sweetwater. Their paths had crossed by mere chance and would diverge just as quickly. By the time Tessa woke, Sam had breakfast prepared, cornmeal mush with the last of his molasses and strong coffee. "Your clothes should be dry," he said, gesturing to where her dress hung near the fire. "I'll step out while you change." When he returned, she was once again the proper lady in her blue traveling dress, though her hair remained loose around her shoulders. "I hope you don't mind," she said, touching her hair self-consciously. "I seem to have lost most of my pins in the commotion yesterday." "Not at all," Sam replied, perhaps too quickly. He cleared his throat. "After breakfast, I'll ride out to your wagon and see about that wheel. Might be I can fix it temporarily, enough to get you to town." "I'd be grateful," Tessa said, taking a seat at the table, "though I must find some way to repay your kindness." "No repayment necessary. Anyone would have done the same." Tessa's gray eyes met his. "We both know that isn't true, Sam." After breakfast, Sam saddled his horse and rode with Tessa back to her stranded wagon. The creek had risen considerably with the storm, but the wagon sat high enough to have escaped flooding. The broken wheel, however, presented a significant challenge. "The axle's damaged too," Sam said after examining it closely. "I can jury-rig a temporary fix, but you'll need a proper wheelwright to make it roadworthy again." "How long will that take?" "Depends on the wheelwright's schedule. Could be a day, could be a week." Sam straightened, wiping his hands on his bandana. "Sweetwater's only about 10 miles from here. I could take you there today if you're agreeable." Tessa glanced at the wagon. "What about my belongings?" "We can load the essentials on my horse. I'll come back for the rest once you're settled." She nodded, though Sam noticed a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. "I suppose that's the most practical solution, though I hate to further impose on your time." "It's no imposition," Sam assured her, surprised by how much he meant it. "I was planning to ride into town soon anyway." They gathered what Tessa deemed essential: a smaller traveling case, a document pouch she was particularly careful with, and a few personal items. Sam secured everything to his saddle, then helped Tessa mount before swinging up behind her. The ride to Sweetwater passed in comfortable conversation. Sam pointed out landmarks and shared bits of local history, while Tessa asked thoughtful questions about the region and its development. The easy rapport that had begun during the storm continued, and Sam found himself increasingly drawn to her intelligence and quiet strength. As they crested the final hill overlooking Sweetwater, Tessa gasped softly. "It's grown so much since I was last here." Sam nodded. The railroad coming through changed everything. Brought more settlers, more business. Sweetwater sprawled below them, a proper town now with several streets of buildings, a church steeple rising above the rest. The rail yard sat at the eastern edge, smoke rising from a waiting locomotive. "It's certainly not the dusty outpost I remember," Tessa mused. They rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from townspeople. Sam was accustomed to being an object of speculation, the solitary rancher who rarely visited town except for supplies, but today the interest seemed heightened by the beautiful woman riding with him. "The Western Star Hotel should have rooms available," Sam said, guiding his horse toward a 2-story clapboard building with freshly painted trim. "It's the best accommodation in town." "I'm sure it will be fine," Tessa replied, though Sam noticed her scanning the street with an oddly appraising eye. As they dismounted in front of the hotel, a commotion from across the street caught their attention. A man burst from the cattleman's bank, red-faced and gesticulating wildly. "Miss Whitney," he called, hurrying across the muddy street. "Miss Whitney, thank the Lord you're safe." Tessa turned, recognition dawning on her face. "Mr. Jenkins, what are you doing here?" The man, middle-aged, portly, and dressed in an Eastern-style business suit, reached them, slightly out of breath. "When your driver arrived in town last night without you, we feared the worst. He said the wagon had broken down and you were waiting alone. We organized a search party, but the storm made it impossible to set out." Sam looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "I apologize for the worry," Tessa said. "This is Mr. Samuel Hawkins. He found me stranded and kindly offered shelter during the storm." Jenkins turned to Sam, looking him up and down with sudden interest. "Hawkins, the small spread north of the valley." Something in the man's tone raised Sam's hackles. "That's right." Jenkins turned back to Tessa. Well, Miss Whitney, we should get you settled properly. Your father's house has been prepared for your arrival. My father's house, Tessa repeated, seeming momentarily taken aback. Yes, of course. The Whitney mansion on Prospect Hill. Jenkins gestured toward the west end of town, where a large house was visible on a rise overlooking Sweetwater. Everything is ready for you, as Mr. Edwards instructed in his letter. Sam felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Whitney Mansion, he echoed, looking at Tessa. Her gray eyes met his, a mixture of apology and resolve in them. I should have been more forthcoming, Sam. My father was Theodore Whitney. The name hung in the air between them. Every person in Sweetwater and the surrounding territory knew the name Theodore Whitney, the wealthiest rancher and largest landowner in the region. The man owned over 50,000 acres of prime Wyoming grazing land and had controlled much of the territory's cattle market for years. I see, Sam said, his voice carefully neutral despite the surge of conflicting emotions. He tipped his hat stiffly. I'll have your belongings sent from the wagon, Miss Whitney. Sam, she began, but he was already turning away. Good day, miss, he said firmly, mounting his horse. With a brief nod to Jenkins, he rode off, his back straight and his expression unreadable. As he rode back toward his small ranch, Sam cursed himself for a fool. Of course, someone like Tessa Whitney wouldn't have given him a second thought under normal circumstances. Their worlds couldn't be further apart. Theodore Whitney had been known for buying out smaller ranchers when times got tough, expanding his empire at the expense of men like Sam's father. Men who worked themselves to death trying to hold on to their dreams while the Whitneys of the world grew ever richer. By the time he reached his cabin, Sam had convinced himself that Tessa's friendly manner had been nothing more than the noblesse oblige of the wealthy, a temporary courtesy extended to a useful stranger. Tomorrow she would be ensconced in her mansion, surrounded by her father's employees and business associates, and he would be forgotten. As he unsaddled his horse, he noticed something caught in one of the saddlebags, a lady's handkerchief, delicately embroidered with the initials T.W. Sam held it for a moment, then shoved it into his pocket, determined to return it at the earliest opportunity and be done with the matter. The next morning, Sam rode to Tessa's stranded wagon with a borrowed team of horses and tools to attempt a temporary repair. He worked methodically, focusing on the physical task to avoid thinking about its owner. After several hours, he managed to secure the broken wheel well enough to move the wagon slowly. As he guided the repaired wagon into Sweetwater, he steeled himself for the possibility of encountering Tessa. The town buzzed with news of Theodore Whitney's daughter taking up residence. Speculation ran rampant about her intentions for her father's vast holdings. Sam delivered the wagon to the livery stable, leaving instructions for its proper repair. He then purchased his necessary supplies and prepared to leave town without making any social calls. His plan was derailed, however, when Sheriff Miller hailed him from the doorway of the law office. Hawkins. Got a minute? Sam reluctantly dismounted and approached the sheriff, a grizzled veteran of the frontier who had kept order in Sweetwater for over a decade. Heard you played the hero for the Whitney heiress, Miller said, offering Sam a cigar, which he declined. Just happened upon a stranded traveler, Sam replied evenly. Nothing heroic about it. Miller studied him with shrewd eyes. Well, heroic or not, she's asked to see you, left word that you should call on her when you're next in town. Sam shifted uncomfortably. I've got a ranch to run, Sheriff. No time for social calls. Son, Miller said, lowering his voice, when the woman who controls half the territory asks to see you, it's generally wise to oblige. Sam knew the sheriff was right, though he disliked the implication. Moreover, he still had Tessa's handkerchief to return. With a resigned nod, he remounted his horse and directed it toward Prospect Hill. The Whitney mansion was everything one would expect of a cattle baron's residence, a large, two-story structure with wide verandas and ornate woodwork surrounded by manicured grounds. As Sam approached, he felt increasingly out of place in his work clothes and dusty boots. A servant answered his knock and led him to a sunlit parlor where Tessa sat at a writing desk. She wore a simple but elegant green dress, her blonde hair neatly arranged in a chignon. She looked up as he entered, her face brightening with a smile that caught Sam off guard. Mr. Hawkins. I'm so pleased you've come, she said, rising to greet him. Miss Whitney, he replied formally, hat in hand, I believe this belongs to you. He extended the handkerchief, careful to maintain a proper distance. Oh, Tessa took it, her fingers briefly brushing his. Thank you, though I must confess I had hoped for more than just the return of a handkerchief. Sam kept his expression neutral. Your wagon has been delivered to Mason's livery. He says it should be properly repaired within a week. That's very kind of you to arrange, Tessa said, studying his face. But you're angry with me. The direct statement caught Sam by surprise. I'm not angry, Miss Whitney. I simply should have recognized sooner that you were out of your proper circle when staying at my cabin. Tessa's gray eyes flashed. My proper circle. And what circle would that be, Mr. Hawkins? People of means and position, Sam replied stiffly. Not small ranchers who can barely keep their herds fed in a hard winter. I see, Tessa placed the handkerchief on a nearby table. So you've decided who I am based solely on my father's name and wealth. Isn't that how the world works? Sam countered. Names and wealth determine everything out here, no matter what stories we tell ourselves about the frontier being a place of equal opportunity. Tessa regarded him thoughtfully. Please sit down, Mr. Hawkins. I think we need to have an honest conversation. Against his better judgment, Sam took the offered chair while Tessa sat across from him. You're right that names and wealth hold power, she began. But you're wrong to assume you know me because of my father's position. I came to Sweetwater not as an heiress looking to expand an empire, but as a daughter trying to understand her father's life and legacy. What's to understand? Sam asked. Theodore Whitney owned more land than any man has a right to. He drove smaller ranchers out of business and controlled the market with an iron fist. Is that what you believe my father did? There was no anger in her question, only genuine curiosity. It's what everyone knows he did, Sam replied, somewhat less confidently under her steady gaze. Then everyone is operating on incomplete information, Tessa said. She rose and went to her desk, retrieving a leather portfolio. My father kept meticulous records of all his business dealings, including, she added, opening the portfolio and extracting a document, his arrangement with Jacob Hawkins. Sam stiffened. What arrangement? Your father approached mine in the winter of 1882, shortly before the terrible blizzards. He was concerned about his ability to sustain his herd through a harsh winter and proposed a partnership. Tessa handed Sam the document. This is the agreement they reached. Sam scanned the legal language, his brow furrowing. According to the document, his father had indeed approached Theodore Whitney for assistance. But rather than sell his land outright, Jacob Hawkins had entered into a profit-sharing arrangement that maintained his ownership while providing capital for improvements. I don't understand, Sam said slowly. My father never mentioned any partnership with Whitney. The agreement stipulated that the partnership remain confidential to protect your father's standing in the community, Tessa explained. He was proud and didn't want to be seen as accepting charity or losing his independence. My father respected that. Sam continued reading. It says here that any profits were to be reinvested in the Hawkins ranch for 5 years before any returns to Whitney Enterprises. Tessa nodded. My father believed in building sustainable operations rather than extracting immediate profits. Unfortunately, your father passed away before the arrangement could fully mature. Sam looked up, his mind racing. So what does this mean now? Does Whitney Enterprises own part of my ranch? Technically, yes, but that's actually why I wanted to see you. Tessa returned to her seat. I'm reevaluating all of my father's holdings and business arrangements. I have no interest in being an absentee landlord or using my inheritance to pressure smaller ranchers. She leaned forward slightly, her expression earnest. The truth is, Sam, I admire what you've accomplished on your own. You've maintained a viable operation under difficult circumstances. I'd like to discuss how we might formalize the end of our business relationship in a way that benefits you. Sam felt as though he'd been knocked from his horse. Everything he thought he knew about Theodore Whitney, and by extension Tessa, was being called into question. Why would you do that? He asked finally. Business is business. You have every right to claim Whitney Enterprises' share. Because some things matter more than maximizing profits, Tessa replied simply. My father taught me that, though many people saw only his wealth and power, not the principles behind his decisions. Over the next hour, Tessa outlined her proposal. She would relinquish Whitney Enterprises' interest in the Hawkins ranch in exchange for Sam's expertise in evaluating other properties in the territory. His knowledge of local conditions and ranching practices would be invaluable as she restructured her father's holdings. "You're offering me complete ownership of my ranch in exchange for advice?" Sam asked incredulously. "I'm offering a fair business arrangement," Tessa corrected. "Your knowledge has value, Sam. I respect that, just as I respect what you did for me when I was stranded." As the conversation continued, Sam's perception of Tessa shifted once again. Behind the refined exterior was a shrewd businesswoman with a clear vision for the future and an unexpected commitment to fairness that defied the ruthless reputation of the Whitney name. When he finally rose to leave, Sam felt both humbled and intrigued. "I'll consider your offer, Miss Whitney." "Please do," she replied, walking him to the door. "And Sam, I hope you know that my gratitude for your assistance during the storm is entirely separate from any business between us. I enjoyed our conversations more than I can say." The sincerity in her gray eyes left Sam momentarily speechless. He managed a nod before placing his hat back on his head and taking his leave. Over the following weeks, Sam found himself increasingly involved in Tessa Whitney's world. What began as occasional consultations about ranch properties evolved into regular meetings to discuss the territory's future. Tessa proved to be as interested in sustainable development as she was in profit, challenging many of the assumptions that had guided her father's business empire. During these meetings, Sam discovered a woman of remarkable depth, educated but practical, wealthy but unpretentious, and possessed of a social conscience rare among those of her station. She listened to his perspectives on everything from grazing practices to water rights with genuine interest. For her part, Tessa seemed to value Sam's forthright manner and deep knowledge of the land. She began to invite him to accompany her on visits to outlying properties, seeking his assessment of their conditions and potential. It was during one such visit, 3 weeks after their first meeting, that their relationship took an unexpected turn. They had ridden to a remote corner of Wyoming Territory to inspect a line cabin that had reportedly fallen into disrepair. The autumn day had begun clear, but turned threatening as afternoon approached. "We should head back," Sam said, eyeing the dark clouds gathering over the mountains. "That storm's moving faster than I expected." Tessa, who had been examining the cabin's foundation, straightened up. "Is there time to reach town before it hits?" Sam shook his head. Not safely, but the cabin looked sound enough to provide shelter despite the cosmetic damage. As if in response, thunder rumbled in the distance. They quickly gathered firewood and secured their horses before the first large drops began to fall. Inside, the cabin was dusty but intact, a single room with a small stone fireplace, a rough table, and a narrow cot. "Seems we're destined to weather storms together," Tessa remarked as Sam built a fire. He glanced up, a half-smile playing at his lips. "At least this time you're not wearing your fine traveling dress." Indeed, Tessa had adopted more practical attire for their excursions, a simple riding skirt and jacket that allowed easier movement on horseback. Her hair was braided simply down her back, and her cheeks were flushed from the day's exercise. "I've discovered that looking the part of a proper Eastern lady isn't particularly useful in Wyoming Territory," she said with a laugh. "Though I suspect some in Sweetwater are scandalized by my transformation." "Sweetwater thrives on scandal," Sam replied, coaxing the kindling to flame. "Gives folks something to discuss besides cattle prices and weather." As the storm intensified outside, they settled into the comfortable rhythm they had established over recent weeks. Tessa produced bread and cheese from her saddlebag, while Sam prepared coffee on the small fire. Their conversation flowed easily from business matters to more personal topics. "May I ask you something?" Tessa said as they sat near the fire, the rain beating steadily on the roof. "Something rather personal." Sam nodded, curious. "Why have you remained alone all these years?" "You're clearly capable and," she hesitated, a slight blush coloring her cheeks, "not unattractive, yet you've chosen solitude." The directness of the question might have offended Sam from someone else, but he had come to expect and appreciate Tessa's forthright manner. "I suppose I convinced myself that attachments were liabilities," he answered honestly. "Every person I've cared for has either left or died. The land remains constant, but people," he shrugged. People are unpredictable. Tessa considered this, so you decided it was safer to expect nothing from others. Something like that, Sam admitted. My father poured everything into that ranch, his dreams, his health, ultimately his life. But in the end, it wasn't enough to secure his place. I learned early that the frontier doesn't reward dreamers. Yet you stayed, Tessa observed softly. You could have sold the ranch after your father died, gone east, found an easier life. Sam stared into the fire. The ranch was his legacy. Leaving would have meant his sacrifices were meaningless. Or perhaps, Tessa suggested gently, despite your claims about solitude, you're more of a dreamer than you admit. Sam looked up, meeting her gray eyes across the small space. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of mutual understanding that transcended their different backgrounds. Maybe we're all dreamers in our own way, he said quietly. Even the practical Miss Whitney, with her business ledgers and property assessments. Tessa smiled, but there was vulnerability in her expression. Especially me, perhaps. I came to Wyoming believing I could honor my father's memory while correcting what I perceived as his mistakes. Is there any greater dream than thinking one person can right historical wrongs? Is that why you've been so generous with me, to right a historical wrong? No, Tessa replied without hesitation. My business decisions are practical. She paused, seeming to search for the right words, my interest in you has nothing to do with my father's legacy. The cabin suddenly seemed smaller, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Sam found himself noticing details he had tried to ignore. The curve of her cheek in the firelight, the way her eyes reflected the flames, the slight parting of her lips as she waited for his response. Tessa, he began, uncertain where the words would lead. A tremendous crack of thunder shook the cabin, making them both start. The moment broken, Sam rose to check that the chimney was drawing properly, while Tessa busied herself reorganizing their supplies. The storm continued through the evening, forcing them to spend the night in the cabin. Sam insisted on sleeping on the floor near the fire, giving Tessa the cot. As he lay awake listening to the rain, he confronted feelings he had long suppressed. Tessa Whitney had somehow slipped past the barriers he had carefully constructed, challenging his assumptions not just about the Whitney family, but about his own capacity for connection. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a washed-clean sky and muddy trails. They rode back to Sweetwater in a companionable silence, each processing the subtle shift in their relationship. As the weeks progressed into early winter, Sam found himself spending more time in Sweetwater than he had in years. His consultations with Tessa had evolved into a true partnership, with Sam providing practical ranching expertise while Tessa navigated the complex business and legal aspects of her inheritance. Their professional relationship became the talk of Sweetwater. Some approved of Tessa's practical approach to managing her father's empire, while others viewed her reliance on a small rancher with suspicion. For his part, Sam ignored the gossip, focusing instead on the unexpected opportunity to influence positive changes in the territory's ranching practices. December arrived with a heavy snowfall that blanketed the region. Sam had just finished winterizing his ranch when a messenger arrived from town with an invitation from Tessa to attend a Christmas gathering at the Whitney mansion. His first instinct was to decline. Social events among Sweetwater's elite had never been his preference, and he doubted he would feel comfortable among Tessa's usual associates. But something, perhaps the memory of firelight reflecting in gray eyes, made him reconsider. On the appointed evening, Sam arrived at the Whitney mansion feeling decidedly out of place despite his best suit and freshly trimmed hair. The house gleamed with light, evergreen boughs decorated every available surface, and the sounds of conversation and laughter spilled from the open door. Tessa greeted him in the entryway, resplendent in a deep blue gown that complemented her blonde hair, which was arranged in an elegant updo with soft tendrils framing her face. I wasn't certain you would come, she said, her smile warming her eyes. Neither was I, Sam admitted, suddenly glad he had made the effort. The gathering was smaller and less formal than Sam had feared. Rather than Sweetwater's social elite, Tessa had invited a diverse group. Local merchants, ranch managers from Whitney Properties, and several families who had received assistance from Tessa's various charitable initiatives. As the evening progressed, Sam observed Tessa moving among her guests with natural grace, listening intently to each person and making connections between those who might benefit from knowing one another. It was a subtle form of community building that Sam hadn't expected but found himself admiring. "She's not what anyone expected when the Whitney heiress came to town," remarked Sheriff Miller, joining Sam near the refreshment table. "Everyone thought she'd sell everything and return to Denver within a month." "She has deeper roots here than people realize," Sam replied, watching as Tessa knelt to speak with a small child who had presented her with a handmade ornament. "And what about you, Hawkins?" Miller asked shrewdly. "Found some unexpected roots yourself?" Sam chose not to answer directly, but the sheriff's knowing smile suggested his feelings were more transparent than he'd thought. Later, as the gathering began to disperse, Tessa found Sam on the veranda, where he had stepped out for a moment of quiet beneath the star-filled Wyoming sky. "Are you hiding from my guests, mister?" "Hawkins?" she asked, joining him at the railing. She had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the December chill. "Just getting some air," he replied. "It was a fine gathering, Tessa." "Not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Sam smiled ruefully. "Bankers and railroad men discussing how to carve up more of the territory." Tessa laughed softly. "I've had those gatherings too, they serve their purpose, but tonight was about something else." "Community," Sam said, understanding dawning. "You're building alliances across social boundaries." "I prefer to think of it as recognizing that a territory's strength comes from all its people, not just those with power or wealth." Tessa turned to face him fully. "It's something I've learned partly from you, Sam." "From me?" "Your perspective has been invaluable. You see things I might miss from my position of privilege." Her voice softened. "You've changed how I think about many things." The moonlight silvered her blonde hair and illuminated her face, and Sam found himself unable to look away. The walls he had built around his heart over years of self-imposed isolation were crumbling rapidly. "Tessa," he began, then faltered, unsure how to express the tumult of his feelings. She saved him from his uncertainty by speaking first. "I've made a decision about the future of Whitney Enterprises," she said, her tone shifting to something more formal. "I'll be announcing it after the new year." Sam straightened, concerned by her sudden change in demeanor. "What sort of decision?" "A restructuring," she replied. "I'm dividing the holdings into more manageable units and establishing a different management approach." "That sounds significant," Sam said carefully, trying to read her expression in the moonlight. "Will you be returning to Denver afterward?" Tessa's eyes met his. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether there's sufficient reason for me to stay." The implication hung in the air between them, a question that demanded an answer Sam wasn't certain he was brave enough to give. Before he could formulate a response, they were interrupted by departing guests requiring Tessa's attention. As Sam rode home that night through the snow-covered landscape, his mind churned with possibilities and fears. Tessa Whitney had awakened feelings he had long suppressed, not just attraction, but hope for a future different from the solitary existence he had accepted as his fate. Yet doubt lingered. Despite their growing closeness, they came from different worlds. He was a small rancher with modest prospects. She was a wealthy heiress with connections throughout the West. Could such differences be reconciled, or was he setting himself up for the very disappointment he had structured his life to avoid? The holidays passed in a flurry of work for both of them. Sam focused on winter ranch management, while Tessa was occupied with her mysterious restructuring plans. They saw each other only briefly during this time, their conversations limited to practical matters rather than personal feelings. In early January, Sweetwater buzzed with anticipation. Tessa had called a meeting at the town hall to announce her plans for Whitney Enterprises. Speculation ran rampant. Some feared she would sell everything to Eastern investors, while others predicted she would consolidate power even further than her father had. The town hall was packed when Sam arrived. He took a position near the back, uncomfortable with the attention his presence inevitably drew. His connection to Tessa was well known by now, generating equal parts curiosity and resentment among certain factions in town. Tessa entered from a side door, accompanied by her lawyer and several associates from the Whitney offices. She wore a businesslike navy dress, her hair arranged simply, projecting quiet confidence as she took her place at the podium. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her clear voice carrying throughout the hall. As you know, since my father's passing, I have been evaluating the structure and impact of Whitney Enterprises on this territory we all call home. She paused, her gaze momentarily finding Sam in the crowd before continuing. My father built an empire based on his belief in the potential of Wyoming. While I honor his vision, I have concluded that the future demands a different approach. A murmur ran through the assembled townspeople. Effective immediately, Whitney Enterprises will be restructured into a cooperative association of independently managed properties, Tessa announced. The large Whitney holdings will be divided into smaller, sustainable ranching operations, with current managers given the opportunity to purchase their sections through favorable financing arrangements. The murmur grew louder. This was unprecedented, the voluntary dissolution of the largest cattle empire in the territory. Additionally, Tessa continued when the noise subsided, Whitney Bank will establish a fund to provide low-interest loans to small ranchers facing hardship, particularly those affected by recent harsh winters. Sam stood speechless as Tessa outlined her vision, a complete transformation of the economic landscape that had dominated Sweetwater for decades. She was effectively dismantling her father's empire in favor of a more equitable distribution of resources and opportunities. When the formal announcement concluded, the hall erupted in conversation. Some were jubilant, others concerned, but no one had expected such a radical departure from established patterns of wealth and power. Sam waited as Tessa was surrounded by people with questions and comments. Their eyes met across the crowded room several times, but it was nearly an hour before she was able to make her way to where he stood. "You've created quite a stir," he said when she finally reached him. "Are you surprised?" she asked, studying his face intently. "By the scope of it, yes," Sam admitted, "though perhaps I shouldn't be. You've never been one for half measures." A small smile curved her lips. "Will you walk with me? I could use some air." They left the hall together, drawing curious glances as they stepped into the crisp January afternoon. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they walked toward the quieter end of town. "You didn't mention your plans to me," Sam said after they had gone some distance in silence. "I couldn't," Tessa replied, "not until everything was legally arranged, and," she added more softly, "I wanted to be certain of my own mind before discussing it with you." "And are you certain of your mind?" Tessa stopped walking and turned to face him. "I am, both about Whitney Enterprises and about my personal future." Sam felt his heart quicken. "Which is?" "I'm staying in Sweetwater," she said. "This is my home now, where I want to build my life." She took a deep breath. "The question is whether that life might include you, Sam Hawkins." The directness of her statement left no room for misinterpretation. Tessa Whitney, the woman who could have chosen any path, any place, any man, was offering him a place in her future. "Tessa," Sam began, struggling to articulate the tangle of emotions her words evoked. "You know I'm not a man of your station. I don't have." "Station," she interrupted, a flash of impatience crossing her face. "After everything we've shared, do you still think I care about such things? I've just dismantled a cattle empire because I believe in a different vision for this territory. Why would I cling to outdated notions of social position in my personal life?" Sam was momentarily taken aback by her vehemence, but he pressed on. "It's not just about what you believe, it's about how the world works. People will talk." "Let them," Tessa said firmly. "Their talk won't change what I feel for you or what I believe you feel for me." Her gray eyes held his with unwavering certainty. "Unless I'm mistaken about that." In that moment, the last of Sam's carefully constructed defenses crumbled. The truth was simpler and more profound than all his fears and doubts. He loved Tessa Whitney, had perhaps loved her since that stormy night in his cabin when she had faced their humble circumstances with grace and good humor. "You're not mistaken," he said quietly, reaching out to take her gloved hand in his. "I've been fighting it because I couldn't see a path forward that made sense. You're Tessa Whitney and I'm just the man who saved me when I was stranded," she finished for him. "The man who showed me kindness without knowing who I was. The man whose integrity and knowledge have guided my decisions these past months." She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "The man I've come to love, despite all the reasons the world might give us not to." The snow fell gently around them as Sam finally surrendered to the truth in his heart. Drawing Tessa closer, he kissed her, tentatively at first, then with growing certainty as she responded with equal fervor. When they finally parted, Sam found himself smiling with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. I suppose this means I'll have to get used to being the subject of Sweetwater gossip. Tessa laughed, her eyes bright with happiness. We'll give them plenty to talk about. The heiress and the humble rancher, quite the scandalous match. Scandalous indeed, Sam agreed, his arm still around her waist. Though I suspect your father might have approved more than people realize. I think he would have, Tessa said thoughtfully. He valued integrity above all else. It's why he respected your father and why I believe he would respect you. They walked on through the snow-covered streets, discussing possibilities for their shared future. Sam's small ranch could become part of their life together, not absorbed into a larger enterprise, but maintained as the foundation of their partnership. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it new growth and renewal across the territory. The restructuring of Whitney Enterprises proceeded smoothly, creating opportunities for many who had previously struggled against the dominance of the large cattle operations. On a perfect May morning, beneath the blue Wyoming sky, Samuel Hawkins and Tessa Whitney were married in a ceremony that brought together people from all walks of frontier life. From ranch hands to bankers, merchants to farmers, the community gathered to witness the union that symbolized a new chapter in Sweetwater's history. As they exchanged vows beneath an arch of spring blossoms, Sam reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together: a broken wagon wheel, a looming storm, and his reluctant decision to offer help to a stranded traveler. I never believed in destiny, he whispered to Tessa as they shared their first dance as husband and wife, but finding you makes me wonder. Tessa's gray eyes sparkled with happiness as she replied, perhaps the frontier rewards dreamers after all, just not in the ways we expect. In the years that followed, the Hawkins ranch flourished under their joint stewardship. The small operation that Sam had struggled to maintain became a model of innovative ranching practices, drawing visitors from across the territory eager to learn from their methods. Tessa's vision for a more equitable distribution of resources transformed the economic landscape of the region. The loan fund she established helped dozens of small ranchers weather difficult seasons, creating a more resilient community less vulnerable to the boom-and-bust cycles that plagued other parts of the frontier. Together, Sam and Tessa built a life that bridged their different worlds, her business acumen complementing his practical knowledge, his groundedness balancing her ambition. Their home became a gathering place for a diverse community united by a shared belief in the possibility of a frontier that rewarded cooperation as much as rugged individualism. And if travelers passing through Sweetwater inquired about the handsome couple who seemed to embody the best of both Eastern refinement and Western practicality, locals would smile knowingly and share the story that had become part of the region's folklore. He saved a stranded woman, not knowing she was the richest rancher in town. But what he found was something far more valuable than wealth, a partner who helped him discover that the true promise of the frontier was not in conquering the land, but in building a life worth sharing, even in the wildest of places.